the Detroit Borg, and today we finally get a look at the brand new iPhone X. This is the 10th anniversary of the iPhone, and I think it's safe to say that this is the most significant iPhone to come out in its 10-year history. It's a major redesign that also changes the way you use the phone. We're going to take a close look at that. So there's a lot of firsts on this iPhone. It's the first with an OLED display, the first without a home button, it's the first iPhone with a mostly edgeless display, and it's the first iPhone with the paperwork, so the phone is actually hidden behind that. So the paperwork is pretty basic, but it's specific to the iPhone X because the iPhone X has such a unique interface. So you want to take a quick look at those instruction booklet or just continue watching the video to find out how to use some of the new features. So moving on to the phone itself, it sort of reminds me of the jet black iPhone 7. In fact, it has the same glossy finish throughout. From the glass to the frame, everything has got a really nice smooth mirrored finish. But of course, in this case, it's not aluminum, it's stainless steel and glass. So the back of this phone is glass, which enables wireless charging, just like the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. In terms of the accessories, again, we have the 5-watt power adapter, but this phone is capable of fast charging if you buy the right power adapter. Apple does sell a 29-watt USB-C power adapter, so this will charge the battery up to 50% in only 30 minutes. We also get a set of wired ear pods along with an adapter if you want to use your own set of headphones. So again, we do not get the wireless AirPods included with the iPhone X. You have to buy those separately. Also included in the box is a standard Lightning to USB cable. Moving on to the silver iPhone X, the unboxing experience is identical. The only difference is the color. So as soon as I pop open the lid, of course, you get some paperwork, but the phone itself facing forward looks identical to the space gray phone. And that's because we have a black bezel instead of a matching white bezel like we got with previous iPhones. But the back of the phone is white or kind of silvery. It actually has a very pearlescent look. So it's a bit more reflective than the silver white on the iPhone 8. And of course, we have that polished stainless steel frame, which is quite a bit more premium than the aluminum on the iPhone 8. The setup process with the iPhone X is very simple thanks to iOS 11, and assuming you have another iPhone running iOS 11, you can easily transfer that information to your new phone, so it transfers all of your accounts and Wi-Fi settings. Of course, the big new feature within the setup process for iPhone X is Face ID. Now, because we don't have Touch ID, this is the only biometric authentication you can use. So it will coach you through the process of setup, and basically you just move your face around in a circle so it can map your face in real time. After that, you'll be prompted to restore or set up as a new device. You can also enter in your Apple Pay information, and if you have an Apple Watch, you can go ahead and set that up here as well. And of course, we have hands-free Siri, so this will train it to your voice. Just like the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, we also have a True Tone display. Now, the best way for me to demonstrate what a True Tone display does is to turn the lights to a more warmer color. So when you activate True Tone or turn off True Tone, you can really see the difference. But basically, it reflects the color tone within the room, so it's easier on the eyes. And generally speaking, I really like the feature on the iPhone 8. Now, both silver and space gray have a stainless steel frame, but the big difference here is that space gray has a coating on top of that stainless steel, which I think should be a little more durable than the raw stainless steel, which will scratch over time. Now, I'm basing that mostly on my experience with the Apple Watches. So the stainless steel Apple Watch scratched really easily, while the space black Apple Watch held up pretty well. Now, if you're worried about scratching the stainless steel, a perfect solution is a D-brand skin. They have a new skin for the iPhone X that completely wraps around the edges. But if you want to show off the stainless steel frame and want something a little easier to install, they have one that covers just the back glass. And the good news here is that both styles are shipped in your order, so you can decide later what you want to do. The skin also provides much more grip to the phone, which is otherwise just smooth glass and stainless steel. And it also keeps those fingerprints at bay, especially on that space gray model. And the good thing about the skin is that it keeps out the dust and grit that might grind against the stainless steel if you had a case on it. D-brand has a huge selection of colors and textures to pick from, and you can choose whether you want the Apple cutout or not, and if you want to protect the camera lens. So make sure you check them out. I'll leave them linked in the description below. So the camera module along the back of this phone is a bit different than we've seen from other iPhones, so it's arranged vertically instead of horizontally, and that's probably because of the true depth camera along the front of the phone, which takes up some space at the top of the phone, so there wasn't as much room to orientate this horizontally. But that really doesn't affect the way the camera works. Now, everything has been combined into this one module. So that includes the quad LED flash, the off-center microphone, and of course the bezel surrounding the camera does protrude quite a bit, but it is stainless steel, which keeps it nice and consistent with the rest of the design. And unfortunately, with that camera bump, the phone does rock around on a flat surface. Because we lost the home button, the side buttons have been updated with some new functions and some new names. So for example, the power button is now the side button, and it's also bigger, and that's because it picks up some new responsibilities, and we'll get into that. We still have the volume controls along the left side, along with our mute switch. Toward the bottom edge, just like the iPhone 8, the Lightning connector does support USB 3.1 for fast charging. We have a microphone on one side, a speaker on the other side, and a matching grill insert that matches the color of the frame. Very nice detail. It also extends to the screws flanking the Lightning connector. And just like the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 8, the earpiece and the bottom speaker work together for stereo speakers, and they sound fantastic, and they're louder and deeper than they were before. Of course, Apple spares no attention to detail, so even the buttons and the SIM tray is also polished stainless steel. And if you eject the SIM tray, you'll see that there is a water gasket around it. So just like the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 8, this is IP67 water resistant. So really the big news with the iPhone 10 comes down to the display and the way they've adapted the interface to make use of it. But getting to the display hardware, this is also the first iPhone with an AMOLED display. This is really big news. Now Apple is calling this a Super Retina HD display. This is 5.8 inches with a resolution of 2436 by 1125, good for 458 ppi. That's the highest pixel density on any Apple device. And because this is an OLED display, we have a contrast ratio of 1,000,000 to 1. And that's because OLED is an emissive display. Each pixel is responsible for emitting the light, rather than a backlight like an IPS display. So if the pixel is off, it's completely black. This also improves the energy efficiency of the display. This also supports the wide color gamut of DCI-P3 like other Apple devices and just like the iPhones before it. And this is still just as bright, if not brighter, than the LCD displays of the iPhone 8, with a maximum brightness of 625 nits. iPhone 10 is also the first iPhone to get an HDR display, and that's thanks to the AMOLED technology. With an AMOLED display, you get those deep blacks, which are needed for that high dynamic contrast. Although the iPhone 10 did not pick up the Pro Motion display of the iPad Pro with the 120Hz refresh rate, they've increased the touch sensitivity from 60 frames per second to 120 frames per second, which might not be noticeable, but it does improve input latency. There's no question that this is a really good looking display, and with OLED, that notch at the top of the phone mostly disappears in most aspects of the interface. The only time it's noticeable is if you have a white background that fills up the entire screen or the home screen. Otherwise, I think it's pretty smartly integrated into the design of the software. Although OLED has many strengths, there are a few drawbacks. One of them is the blue shift, which is pretty common to OLED panels. So when you tilt the phone off axis, you might see some color distortion. Now, it's not too bad on the iPhone. It can be bad on some phones like the Pixel 2. In terms of size, although we have a larger screen, 5.8 inches versus 4.7 and 5.5 on the 8 and 8 Plus, the footprint of the iPhone 10 is much closer to the iPhone 8. So it's really compact for its screen size. But it's important to keep in mind that the screen on the iPhone 10 is narrower than the one on the iPhone 8 Plus. So in some situations, the iPhone 10 screen can look smaller than the iPhone 8 Plus screen, especially when it comes to watching video. The iPhone 8 Plus has a very conventional 1080p 16:9 aspect ratio. But the iPhone 10 is taller and narrower, and of course we have those rounded corners and the notch at the top. So that means videos usually have to be cropped down to fit the usable area of the screen. Otherwise, if you go full screen, the notch and the rounded corners make itself known. Although the display doesn't wrap around the edges like a Galaxy S8, it essentially looks like it's painted right on the glass. There's no gap between the glass and the panel. And with the rounded corners and curved glass, the effect is especially pronounced. It's a really neat design. The iPhone 10 really isn't the first phone to push the display to the edges like this, but it's really the first one to sort of push it toward the corners. So that means for the most part, the bezel around the entire display is symmetrical. There's no chin or forehead, and it creates a really impressive look. That is until you get to the notch. But that notch is also necessary because it's replacing one of the features we had before, which is Touch ID. So Apple is calling this technology True Depth. We still have a 7 megapixel front-facing camera with an f2.2 aperture capable of recording video at 1080p. But this is combined with other sensors, such as a 3D mapping sensor, which basically casts a grid on your face using infrared. So unless you have a twin or a really sophisticated 3D model of your face, you won't be able to use Face ID to unlock it. Now those flashes you're seeing from the notch are actually the infrared LEDs. Now you won't see this in normal use. This is only visible because my camera is picking up the infrared light. But this means Face ID can work in any lighting conditions, pitch black or bright daylight. Now with my infrared camera, I can actually see how this works. So first it's scanning for my irises. So it's checking to see if my eyes are looking at the device. Once it determines that, it actually flashes the grid right on my face. So if I slow it down, you can actually see the dots. It actually works pretty well. So Face ID replaces everything that Touch ID was used for. That includes Apple Pay, iTunes and App Store purchases, and even bringing up your password. So instead of bringing up a Touch ID prompt, instead it scans for your face. There's also a couple new settings under Face ID. One of them is require attention for Face ID. So basically this means you need to be looking at the phone with your eyes open in order for it to work. Otherwise it could just scan the side of your face and unlock it pretty quickly. But another feature you can turn on is the attention aware feature, which very similar to another phone keeps track of your eyes, so it knows whether you're looking at the display or not and will prevent it from going to sleep. So again, that's kind of a nice feature. So for me, Face ID has been extremely reliable. It works even better than Touch ID. And the great thing here is that it requires no involvement from me. I just wake up my phone, whether I lift it up or tap the screen, facial recognition, replacing Touch ID. So before we get into the details, let's get to the unboxing. And first up, we have Space Gray. They make it really easy to open these up. We have a plastic tab that allows us to take off the plastic shroud. Now, once we lift up the lid, the first thing again we see is the paperwork. So the phone is actually hidden behind that. So the paperwork is pretty basic, but it's specific to the iPhone X.